was riding my bike along the narrow forest road, the one I use almost every morning when the weather is decent enough. The air was cool, the ground still damp after last night's drizzle, and the smell of wet birch bark clung to everything around me. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular until I caught sight of a cloud of dust hanging low ahead. It wasn't normal for this road. No one really used it except a few locals and the occasional ranger. When I got closer, I realized it came from an old green truck moving slowly, almost dragging itself forward. Its suspension groaned under the weight of something heavy in the back. I steadied my handlebars, stood up on the pedals, and pushed harder to catch up. As soon as I pulled close enough, my stomach tightened. A massive brown bear lay stretched across the truck bed, unmoving, limp. Its fur looked darker in places, matted with dirt and dried blood. Even from a distance, I could see its sides rising and falling in rough, uneven breaths. The truck rolled to a stop near a bend where the forest opened slightly. A man stepped out from the passenger side. I recognized him almost immediately. Walter, the local forest ranger. He always carried himself like someone who spent more time with trees than people. He waved when he spotted me. I stopped my bike and leaned it against a birch. I asked what had happened. Walter rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes fixed on the bear. He said they had found her earlier that morning, lying near an old logging trail. Looked like she had been in a fight, maybe with another bear or something desperate enough to challenge her. He said she was barely conscious when they arrived, and they had to move fast before she slipped away. The plan was to reach the rehab center 3 towns over so the vet team could take over. He sounded tired, like he had been running since dawn. As he talked, I walked toward the rear of the truck. Up close, the size of the bear was overwhelming. Her head rested against the metal frame, her muzzle twitching slightly. I crouched near the ground to steady myself and noticed something else. Small drops of blood on the dirt, not heavy like hers. Thin, scattered, leading into the brush. I asked Walter if she had cubs. His reply came too quickly. He said he hadn't seen any, but the way he avoided looking directly at me made it clear he wasn't fully sure. Maybe they hadn't checked thoroughly. Maybe they didn't have time. Maybe they simply hoped she was alone. A faint noise came from the thicket beyond the truck. I turned sharply, scanning between the branches. At first I thought it was just a squirrel darting away, but then I caught a glimpse of something small shifting deeper into the shadows. Something that wasn't running fast, more like hiding. Watching. The truck engine started again behind me. Walter shouted that they needed to leave immediately or she might not survive the trip. I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the darkness between the trees. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a tiny shape slip to the side, then freeze. Just long enough for me to realize it wasn't my imagination. Someone small was still out there. As the truck rumbled away, carrying the injured bear toward the main road, the forest seemed to fall into a strange stillness. I stood there for a moment with my bike at my side, unsure whether to follow the truck or turn back toward the thicket where I had seen that small movement. Walter stayed beside me, watching the dust fade. He finally spoke. He said they had found the bear near an abandoned fire road, lying half-conscious. There hadn't been time to look closely around the area. The vets were worried she wouldn't last another hour without proper care. He insisted they hadn't meant to leave anything behind. They just hadn't known there was anything to leave. I told him about the small shape I'd spotted hiding in the brush. Something about the way it moved made my chest tighten. Walter didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, rubbed his eyes, and motioned toward the direction the truck had come from. He said we needed to go back to the exact spot where they first found her. We walked our bikes most of the way because the trail was narrow and choked with fallen branches. The deeper we went, the quieter the woods became. When we finally reached the clearing, the ground still showed signs of struggle. Patches of flattened grass, claw marks on the dirt, and the faint, sharp smell of fear that only wild animals leave behind. Walter crouched down and sifted through the soil with his fingers. He pointed out 2 separate sets of tiny prints, each no bigger than my thumb. The spacing showed they were from 2 young cubs. My stomach sank. They had been here, and they couldn't be far. We followed the prints deeper into the trees, but the trail became confusing. The cubs had wandered in circles, doubling back several times. At one point, Walter froze and held up a hand. He said he heard something, a small, high-pitched sound, almost like a cry. I didn't hear it at first, but I trusted him enough to stop breathing for a second. The sound came again, faint and short, but impossible to tell where it came from. We split up a little, staying within sight of each other. I pushed aside branches, calling out softly, trying not to scare anything deeper into hiding. The forest felt tense, as if every shadow might be watching us. Walter kept listening, tilting his head, trying to catch that same sound again, but the woods swallowed it. After nearly an hour of searching, I stumbled across a cluster of exposed roots where an old tree had fallen years ago. Something about the shape of the hole beneath it made me stop. I knelt and leaned in closer. A small movement flickered in the dark space. A trembling shape pressed into the dirt. It was a cub, curled tightly, shaking, its fur clinging to the roots. It didn't try to run or even lift its head. Its breaths were shallow, like tiny puffs of air barely escaping its body. When I reached in slowly, it didn't resist. It was too exhausted to fight. Walter hurried over when he heard me call. He examined the cub quickly, whispering that this one was lucky we found it in time. But when he asked if I'd seen another anywhere nearby, I could only shake my head. There were 2 sets of tracks, and we had only found one. We carried the small cub in Walter's jacket, wrapped gently so it wouldn't lose more heat. Its tiny claws occasionally caught on the fabric, but it never tried to escape. It only made a soft, pitiful sound every few minutes, its eyes half open, confused and searching for a mother that wasn't there. Walter's hunting cabin wasn't far. It sat near a narrow creek, hidden by tall firs. Inside, it was warmer than I expected. He lit the small propane heater, and we set the cub in a padded crate he used for transporting injured owls. The moment we stepped back, the cub let out a sharper cry, then another. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the cabin like a needle. Walter paced, rubbing his hands. He said he had seen this before. Cubs separated from their mother often called until they exhausted themselves. I could tell it bothered him more than he admitted. After a while, he finally sat and said he didn't think the second cub had wandered far. Cubs this young didn't travel alone unless something scared them into running. The thought of the other cub being out there in the dark, possibly injured or cornered, gnawed at me. I told Walter that we should keep searching, even if it meant going back out at night. He didn't answer at first. The forest changed completely after sunset. Every sound doubled, every shadow felt alive. But leaving the second cub out there until morning felt worse. Walter finally agreed. He handed me one of his old headlamps and checked the batteries twice. He also took his flare gun, not because he wanted to scare anything, but because a flare would be visible for miles if something went wrong. When we stepped outside, the air had cooled sharply. The forest around the cabin was pitch black, except where our headlamps carved thin tunnels of light through the branches. Somewhere behind us, the cub cried again, muffled by the cabin walls. We followed the same trail we had taken earlier, moving slowly. Each step felt heavier than it had in daylight. At one point, a deep snap echoed from somewhere to our right, a thick branch breaking under something heavy. Walter stopped immediately. He whispered that a male bear might be nearby. Males sometimes attacked cubs that weren't theirs. The idea made the darkness feel even closer. We kept moving but stayed tighter together. After a few minutes, we reached an area where the ground was disturbed. The dirt was churned up, leaves scattered, and deep claw marks sliced across a fallen log. But there was no cub, only the lingering sense of something violent passing through. Walter crouched and touched the marks. He said a male bear might have come through, maybe chasing the cub or maybe just walking past. There was no blood, no fur, no clear sign of what happened. The uncertainty hung in the air like fog. I felt the urge to call out loudly, but Walter warned against it. If a male was close, yelling could draw it straight to us. Instead, we listened. Nothing but the steady pulse of the forest at night. We were about to turn back when a sound cut through the silence. A faint, trembling squeak. Not from ahead, not from the disturbed clearing. It came from behind us, somewhere we hadn't searched at all. I swung my light toward the darkness, feeling my chest tighten. The sound came again, just a little louder. The faint squeak came again, a little steadier this time, enough for Walter to freeze mid-step and tilt his head. He turned slowly, sweeping his headlamp across the trees with the kind of caution that only comes from years of working in forests at night. The sound wasn't coming from the disturbed clearing behind us, where we had spent so much time searching. It came from deeper in the opposite direction, toward a tight wall of firs woven together so densely that almost no moonlight reached the ground. We moved toward the sound, careful and deliberate. our lights cutting thin tunnels through the darkness. Every few steps, branches brushed our shoulders, and cold droplets slid down our sleeves. The ground grew softer as we walked, covered in wet needles and thick moss. When we pushed aside a curtain of low branches, the beam of my lamp fell onto a tangled cluster of exposed roots rising like twisted ribs from the earth. Beneath them, in a small hollow made by the upended soil, lay the second cub. It was barely moving. Its tiny chest trembled with uneven breaths, each one weaker than the last. Its fur was damp and cold, clinging to the mud that streaked its side. I crouched and reached toward it carefully. When my fingers brushed its flank, it twitched once, then fell still again. Not lifeless, just drained of every ounce of strength. Walter knelt beside me and examined the ground. Heavy tracks pressed deep into the soil, broad, unmistakable marks of an adult male bear. They circled the hollow, then veered sharply away, as if the male had stepped close enough to investigate but hadn't touched the cub. Or perhaps he had been interrupted. Walter didn't say that out loud, but the tightness in his jaw told me he was thinking it. We wrapped the cub in Walter's spare flannel, tucking the fabric around its small body. As soon as we lifted it, a sharp crack echoed in the distance. Something massive stepping on a branch thick enough to snap only under significant weight. A second sound followed, slower, heavier, measured. Walter leaned close and whispered that we needed to move immediately. We headed back the way we had come, but Walter steered us away from the direct path to the cabin. Instead, we took a winding detour through a thinner patch of woods. He explained quietly that a startled male bear could behave unpredictably, and the last thing we needed was to walk straight into its path. The night air felt tense, almost watchful, and every rustle of leaves seemed louder than it should have been. The cub in my arms felt terrifyingly light, its warmth faint beneath the flannel. I kept checking its breathing with my thumb, counting each unsteady rise of its chest. The fragile rhythm pushed me to move faster, even as the ground grew uneven and the forest pressed in around us. We reached the edge of a marshy stretch of land where a narrow wooden footbridge crossed a shallow, murky patch of water. Walter stepped onto it first, testing his weight carefully on each board. They creaked but held, so he motioned for me to follow. I stepped onto the bridge, balancing with one arm while cradling the cub with the other. Halfway across, the wood shifted sharply beneath my foot. A loud crack snapped through the night, and one of the planks split downward, pulling a corner of the bridge several inches lower. My leg plunged through the gap, cold water splashing up my shin. For a terrifying moment, I felt myself pitching forward with the cub trapped against my chest. Walter lunged and grabbed the back of my jacket, hauling me upright before I could fall through completely. The cub let out a thin whine as I tightened my grip. My heart hammered so violently that the sound drowned out everything else: the swamp, the wind, even Walter's breathing. We hurried the last few steps across the bridge, not trusting it to hold any longer. On solid ground again, we pushed deeper into the trees, moving faster now. Behind us, something stirred, branches bending, heavy shifting sounds, the unmistakable rhythm of something large moving through the underbrush. When we finally allowed ourselves to slow, Walter raised his headlamp and swept it across the tree-line. The beam caught two glowing reflections in the dark, wide, steady, spaced far apart. A large shadow stepped forward between the trunks, its massive form moving slowly, deliberately, straight in our direction. Walter instinctively raised his arm in front of me, as if that thin barrier could stop whatever was watching us from the tree-line. The glowing eyes stayed fixed for several long seconds, unblinking, reflecting our headlamps like distant embers in a furnace. My grip tightened around the cub, feeling its tiny heartbeat flutter rapidly against my chest. The forest held its breath with us. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "Hold your light up so we can see you." It wasn't a growl. It wasn't an animal at all. It was a human voice, steady, cautious, carrying a kind of tension that told me they were just as unsure about us as we were about them. Walter's shoulders dropped in relief, and he let out a sharp exhale that almost sounded like a laugh he had been holding back. He lowered his arm and called out, asking who was there. A beam of white light flickered between the trees, followed by the unmistakable crunch of boots on the forest floor. Two figures emerged from the shadows. Both wore reflective rescue vests and carried heavy equipment bags. Their faces were drawn with worry, exhausted but alert. The taller volunteer lifted a hand in greeting and explained breathlessly that they were from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. They had rushed back the moment the veterinarian realized the injured bear they transported was lactating. That meant she had cubs somewhere nearby, and every minute counted. When they couldn't reach Walter by radio, they hiked into the woods hoping to retrace the search. Walter let out a long breath and told them we had found both cubs. I lowered the bundle in my arms so they could see the small face tucked beneath the flannel. One volunteer stepped closer, slipping into calm, practiced movements, checking the cub's breathing, its temperature, its responsiveness. He nodded, relieved, but his eyes still carried urgency. Time mattered. They asked where the first cub was. Walter explained it was safe in his cabin. The volunteers exchanged quick, meaningful glances, as if silently recalculating their plan. They said the mother bear was alive after surgery, but still in critical condition, and the cubs needed to be transported immediately to increase their chances of survival. We moved together as a group, our lights bobbing through the darkness. With more people around, the earlier tension drained from the forest. The volunteers continued scanning the treeline out of habit, but there was no sign of the male bear we had feared. Only the rustling of leaves and the soft crunch of our boots. When we reached the cabin, the first cub inside let out a faint cry at the sound of movement. The volunteers didn't waste a second. They worked with careful urgency, transferring both cubs into insulated carriers lined with warm pads. Tiny oxygen vents hissed softly as they secured everything. They explained the cubs would be kept warm, fed small amounts at regular intervals, and monitored for dehydration and shock. Before leaving, the taller volunteer looked at Walter and me with a seriousness that sank deep. He said that if we hadn't acted when we did, if we hadn't pushed through the forest, searched at night, and refused to give up, both cubs likely would have died before morning. The words hung in the air long after the volunteers started back toward their vehicle. 2 days later, Walter called me early in the morning. His voice carried something lighter, almost hopeful. He explained that the mother bear had survived the surgery. She was weak but responsive, able to lift her head, and the vets believed she would eventually recover enough to reunite with her cubs. They had already placed the cubs in a nearby ward so they could smell her presence and hear her movements. Walter paused, then told me something else. The volunteers had admitted that when they first found the mother bear, they were overwhelmed by her condition. They were terrified she wouldn't make it through the drive to the center. Their minds narrowed to a single goal: saving the mother before it was too late. In that desperate rush, they overlooked the signs of her cubs. It wasn't negligence. It was fear, urgency, and the chaos of an unfolding crisis. I understood that more than I expected. The forest demanded quick decisions, and sometimes those decisions felt impossible. We had all done what we thought was right in the moment. Mistakes happened, but they didn't define the outcome. What mattered was that the story didn't end in tragedy. A week later, I rode my bike down the same forest road. The morning sun filtered through the trees, laying long golden stripes across the path. I slowed as I reached the bend where I had first seen the old truck. The memory came back in a wave. The massive bear lying motionless, the smell of pine, the sight of small shapes hiding in the shadows. But the feeling was different now. There was no dread twisting in my stomach. Instead, there was something softer, gratitude, maybe, or the quiet realization that things could have ended far worse. The road didn't carry fear anymore. It carried the reminder that sometimes, even in the darkest corners of the forest, a second chance finds its way through. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories. And now just click the playlist or the next video on your screen.